Now, Gauteng Finance and Economic MEC Lebogang Maile has announced that investors have heeded the call to pledge investments into the province, even surpassing the 300 billion target by 12.5 billion rands. Now, Maile was hosting investors and other stakeholders at the inaugural Gauteng Investment Conference in Johannesburg. To tell us more now, we're joined by Phelisa Nkomo, who is Development Economist and Board Chair of OXFAM. Thank you so much for your time on the program this hour. So what is the general consensus about investment when we look at Gauteng? Is there confidence when it comes to that?
Firstly, I just need to say that actually the investment conference was timely. It's always important for government and business to really cross eyes and really begin to talk about what are the inhibiting factors that leads to less investment in the province. So that's the first thing. I think the second issue, Gauteng used to contribute just above 40% of GDP, sitting at 34%. And it's important. It was good for the MEC to make it sure that there's a serious conversation, because it means that there's the industrial output of Gauteng into the South African economy is actually declining. And it's also important for them to interrogate what could be the reasons why they are. And for me, one of the key issues I'll be keen to hear is for them to actually better understand what are the reasons why. But I think the third issue, it's good that they've received so many pledges. But here's the key issue. He needs to pay attention to is that we have been hosting these conferences in the investment conferences, and we've had pledges. But amongst the key things that we've discovered as economists is that some of the pledges are actually old pledges. In fact, they are generally part of the investment plan of companies. So there's absolutely nothing new. But the bigger issue he also needs to pay attention to is how to deal with what we call public policy failures, which are related to the red tape, the cost of investment in Gauteng, the issues around structural skills mismatch, the issue that is related to crime, for instance, right? Because there's a massive concern about crime in South Africa, but also the fact that actually you're seeing a move out of Gauteng into either other provinces, or to Lesotho or Swaziland, or to other neighboring countries. So let me make an example. Early in the days, South Africa used to dominate the capital equipment market by almost 85%. So capital equipment manufacturing or equipment are used for the mining sector, right? So the mining belt in the SADC region, but also even in the African market, we're sitting now at probably at less than 30%. We've lost that market share almost of 50%. And it means that the MEC needs to then start interrogating the reasons of losing market share in different markets, but also to look at the sectors. So any pledges that are still looking at macro investment, right, you're not going to achieve a lot. You need a lot more sectoral conversation that looks at what are the challenges at a sectoral level. Another case in point is the steel sector, right? I'm aware that in the State of the Province opening address, the Premier mentioned that there's a steel company that is going to be coming to open in South Africa to really begin to close the gap that is likely to be left by the ArcelorMittal. And I said even then, that's actually a good intervention, because there is no economy that you can never build a resilient economy without the steel industry, because steel industry gets used as the pillar of several sectors probably about 6 to 10 sectors of the economy use the steel industry. So if you don't have steel industry, you're going to be less vulnerable. But I would have been keen, for instance, to hear a lot more on what progress is taking place with regards to that steel company that is coming to invest in Gauteng.
And I like that you mentioned that right now because, we often hear of large pledges, as you've also rightfully mentioned, all these pledges are announced at these conferences. But how much of the investment pledged in previous years has actually materialized when we look at it? And how much of it actually trickles to the ground where it matters the most? Because, critics often argue that such conferences cater to large corporations as well as, foreign investors. Are there any tangible benefits for township economies, for instance, when we look at SMMEs and historically disadvantaged communities? What's your take on that?
That's a very important question because one of the key things, and look, he can be forgiven that this was Gauteng's inaugural conference, but also he needs to pay attention to the fact that this is not the first investment conference, which of course, interestingly, all these other conferences were hosted in Gauteng. African Development Bank hosted an investment conference for almost 3 years in Gauteng. The National Investment Conference was hosted here in Gauteng. And of course, he can argue that, no, those were not my conferences. And I do think that politicians need to be aware to the reality that South Africans are paying attention to these conferences, not only from a spending perspective, but also from a multiplier effectiveness perspective, in that people are asking, how will this conference change my life as a small medium enterprise, right? And part of even of the agenda, I listened to the president's speech very well, and even with some of the opening remarks by different senior government leaders, is that we're still thinking macro. We're not paying attention to the fact that 61% of South Africa's economy is actually made up of small, medium enterprise. And I know that this has to do with the history of the fact that post-democratic dispensation, we inherited highly conglomerate economy, which was organized. You look at the IT sector, you look at the banking sector, you look at the construction sector, and you look at the mining sector. So those were highly organized. But over the years, their GDP contribution have declined. And what does that mean? It's actually, the indication is that it means that we need to, for us to build a resilient economy, we need to go and build from the bottom. So you can't now host a conference that does not have a small medium enterprise section into it. So I saw they had sessions that were called growth conversations, public-private enterprise PPPs, and the other one was focusing on digital economy, etc. But then you think about, but where's the SMME conversation in here? Look, I understand. One of the things that he technically did was that the conference was just 1 day. So he was focusing on wanting to make it sure that it achieved its objective. But without township economy, without rural economy, without interprovincial planning, Gauteng actually, is a recipient to probably more than 10 million citizens who work outside of Gauteng. So what that means is that you can't just Gauteng host a conference and not talk about the fact that you attract people who are looking for jobs, who come from Free State, who come from Eastern Cape, who come from Limpopo, and who come from KwaZulu-Natal. And therefore, a conversation needs to actually include other provinces on how do we build resilient sectors so that we receive less migration from other provinces. So, and the indication is that the planning process and the resource allocation and investment conversation is not a Gauteng conversation. It must be about also provinces that are coming into the country. And I do think that we are caught into the old version of investment that if the province focuses on itself, then the other provinces will have to see what they need to do. And it's a massive challenge for South Africa because people are moving. People have shown that provinces that we were born in or that used to be our homes, if they don't create opportunities we're looking for, we're going to pack our bags and move. So in essence, there's a lot more scrutiny in what Gauteng does because, historically, it's always been kind of like been ahead of other provinces. But it can't, from an economic development perspective, but it can't exclude other provinces when it does this type of planning. SMMEs, townships are very important. Rural development, youth, women's economic empowerment, right, needs to be a cross-cutting issue. And I saw the conversation was kind of like very academic. It was like Gauteng had started just yesterday, right? It's really not looking at, let's take stock of what has happened. And this is what we've achieved. And these are and hence I'm talking about a micro sectoral focus conversation. 31 years after a democratic dispensation, you can't host an investment conversation that does not have a zoom in at a sectorial and say, what sectors that needs to hold this economy together?
All right.
And what are the challenges we're confronting? How do we resolve it? So that investors and people who are entrepreneurs can actually see that government is keen in resolving our sectoral issue. Last issue is government's pledging funding on those sectors. Private sector appetite is always going to be limited when government is not saying, I'm putting together 10 billion in the sector to revive it and support it.
All right, that's Phelisa Nkomo talking to us there about the inaugural Gauteng Investment Conference which took place yesterday. Thanks ever so much for your time.